Today I'm going to show you how to permanently fix your tight hamstrings. Many people complain about tight hamstrings, and for good reason. It's a super common issue. Now, one of the reasons why tight hamstrings are so common is actually due to excessive sitting. The muscles and the connective tissue, the fascia in our bodies, tends to adapt to the positions that we put them in and sustain for long periods of time. When you're seated, your knee is in a flexed position, which puts the hamstrings into a shortened position. And if you spend a lot of time in this position, this creates adaptive shortening of the hamstrings, which then leads them to become short and tight. People also commonly talk about this idea when it comes to excessive sitting and what it does to the hip flexors, because the hip is also in a flexed position, similar to the knee, which can create shortening of the hip flexors. But not a lot of people are talking about this as it relates to the hamstrings. As your hamstrings get tighter and tighter, they get more overactive and then want to do the work that they're not supposed to do, which can kind of lead to shut off glutes, or glutes that are not as active as they should be. Which then makes it so that when you're walking around, your body's using your hamstrings to propel your hip into extension like this. And this whole thing kind of creates this vicious cycle of the hamstrings getting stronger and stronger and tighter over the years as your glutes get weaker and weaker. So the question is, how do you fix this problem? Well, I'm going to show you a very simple formula that I've had hundreds of online coaching clients do to fix this exact issue. So stay tuned as we get into it. The very first thing that we want to do is some static stretching of the hamstrings, okay? You can get in any static stretch position for the hamstrings. My two favorites are either lying on the back, blocking the calf with my hands, pulling the hamstring up, or basically propping my foot up on a bench, a chair, or something like that, and stretching the hamstrings in this position. If you're going to be stretching the hamstrings in this position, make sure that you're hinging forwards from the hips and the back is in a neutral position. You want that back to be straight, slight bend in the knee. You're trying to create as much distance between the knee and the butt bone, which is where the hamstrings insert and attach, as possible. So kind of keep that leg straight, slight bend, hinge forward from the hips like a door hinge. And basically, this is how you statically stretch the hamstrings. When you're in this position, I'd encourage you to be breathing through your nose diaphragmatically, sending that air down low into your belly. What this will help do is activate parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. Relax mode, feed or breathe mode, rest or digest mode. Okay, lots of different names for this. It's basically a relaxation response. When we're spending time doing static stretching, we want to be calming the body down, telling your nervous system that it's okay for you to be getting into this range of motion. So no clenching of the teeth, no clenching of the fists, relax your face, breathe through your nose as you spend 2 minutes stretching both hamstrings. 2 minutes is kind of the sweet spot, how much time we want to spend in this position. The next thing that we're going to do is what's called PAILs and rails, all right? This is a fancy acronym for progressive and regressive angular isometric loading. It's basically a fancy way of saying, while you're in this stretch position, either on your back or with your leg up, what we're going to do is contract the muscles against the stretch, all right, and then contract the muscles with the stretch. This works on a deep nervous system level to unlock more range of motion than what you've probably ever had before, all right? So here's how it would break down. If you're in this, you can do this on the ground as well, but if you're in the standing position with your foot up on something, what you're going to start to do is drive that heel down into the bench as though you're trying to kick that heel through the bench, okay? You're activating the hamstring here. You're going to activate that hamstring more and more and more and more and build up the intensity of that contraction until gradually over 30 seconds, at the end of that 30 seconds, you're pushing down as hard as you can and you're at 100% maximum contractile capacity. All right. Immediately following that, what you're going to do there is try to raise that leg up. Okay. You're going to hinge forward from the hips a little bit more. Try to raise that heel up. Activate the antagonist muscles, the opposite muscles. In this case, the hip flexors. Okay. And the quad muscles. Squeeze the quad, squeeze the hip flexors, progressively build up that contraction there as well, as though you're trying to raise that foot off of the bench, continuing to hinge forwards at the hips, okay? And basically at the end of that 30 seconds there, you should be pulling the leg up at maximum 100% contractile capacity, okay? That is one round of what we call PAILs and rails, all right? The first part is PAILs, the second part is rails. Again, fancy acronym. You're basically kicking your leg down and then lifting it up, okay? You can do anywhere between 2 to 4 rounds of this. The more you do, the more of an effect it's going to have. So now that we've stretched the crap out of the hamstrings, really increased their flexibility and range of motion there, we have to get the glutes stronger. All right. What I was talking about earlier in this video is synergistic dominance of the hamstrings. When we sit for long periods of time, it makes the hamstrings short and tight, which then leads to overactivity of the hamstrings. When the hamstrings are overactive, they become synergistically dominant over the glutes. All right. What does this mean? It means during hip extension, all right, which is when your hip is moving like this. All right. That's hip extension. You're doing that all the time. When you're seated and you stand up, that's hip extension. When you go down into a squat and you stand up, hip extension. When you walk and your leg goes back behind you, that's hip extension. The prime mover, the muscle that should be doing the majority of the work to propel that leg back into extension like this, is the gluteus maximus. All right. But when the hamstrings become short, tight, and overactive, they start to basically assist the glutes in extending that hip too much. All right. They are what's called synergist muscles. They're supposed to help the glutes out to extend the hip, not overpower them completely. But this is what oftentimes happens when people have very tight, overactive hamstrings. All right. Their hamstrings work way too much to propel that leg back like this. And this is one of the reasons why the hamstrings get so tight. All right. Because once you start to develop tightness there, then your body starts to use these muscles to extend your hip all the time. All right. And then that constant use of the hamstrings basically leads them to become even more strong, overactive, and tight, which then leads to weakening of the glutes as the glutes become increasingly more reliant on the hamstrings underneath them to do all the work. And it's just a vicious cycle that just keeps compounding on itself until your glutes shrink into nothing and your hamstrings get really thick, tight, and ropey. All right. So we can stretch the hamstrings, which is what I showed you how to do at the beginning part of this video. Static stretching followed by pails and rails. But the long-term fix to this, other than trying to stand more and spend less time in a seated position, the long-term fix to this is to get the glutes to become a lot stronger so that the hamstrings do not have to be synergistically dominant over the weak glutes. So what I'm getting at here is the glutes need to get stronger. We need to do exercises that involve hip extension, like hip thrusters or hip bridges. But we also have to realize that you're probably going to be feeling these movements, these traditional glute strengthening exercises, more so in your hamstrings than in your glute. If you have really bad hamstring dominance, it's not going to matter how much you bend your knee or how close you pull that heel to the butt. You're still just going to feel mostly hamstrings working. All right. If that is basically the case, what we need to do here is we need to do glute exercises like hip bridges or hip thrusters. But what's very, very important here is we need to inhibit the hamstrings from firing in between sets of these exercises. Okay. How do you do something like that? How do you inhibit them, turn them off, shut them down, turn down the volume on them so they don't work as much? Well, stretching has that effect, but also interset, in between sets, interset self-massage of the hamstrings works amazingly well, too. All right. So to do this, you can put a ball underneath your hamstrings. All right. Pin it to a bench or a chair and then extend and flex the knee a bunch and do this all the way down the hamstring, 30 seconds each side as you're resting in between sets of hip bridges. All right. What this will do is it will shut down the hamstrings, encourage the glutes to contract. Shut down the hamstrings, encourage the glutes to contract. Shut down the hamstrings, encourage the glutes to contract. Okay. We're weakening these synergist muscles, these muscles that the body relies too much on in some cases, to extend the hip, which is going to force the prime mover, the glute, to turn back on and reawaken again. Okay. This protocol is not necessary indefinitely, but this is something I have my clients do until they feel their glutes working more during hip extension than they do their hamstrings. Okay. Once that has been achieved, then you can just maintain the glute strength. But prior to basically getting there, all right, if you're still feeling the hamstrings, this protocol is very, very helpful. All right. And again, why is this whole thing necessary in the first place? The glutes have to be the prime mover with regards to hip extension. All right. They get weak from sitting on them all day. They're actually in a stretch position when the hips are flexed. You're squishing them, which creates like an ischemic effect in the glutes, which kind of brings blood out of them. Weak glutes are a very, very common issue. And they're really the long-term kind of thing behind tight hamstrings. You can stretch your hamstrings all you want. Do advanced flexibility drills like what I showed you today. And those are all helpful. However, If your glutes are very weak and underdeveloped, this will continue to be a recurring issue for you. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you want my free workout that helps you get bigger, stronger, leaner while fixing common muscle imbalances, mobility issues, movement pattern compensations, posture, all right? Then open up the description down below or check out the pinned comment in the comment section down below and click that link. What that will do is it'll take you over to my website where you can learn more about my free plan called the 3-Day Functional Training Split. And basically, enter in your email. I'll send you a copy of the workout within 5 minutes. If you're looking for another spot to get that free workout, you can just click this over here. That should take you over there as well. If you want to see another video similar to this one, click this over here. And if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, like I said earlier, please do that. I'm going to be a whole lot more active here this year. So do that over here or down below. And I'll see you next time.